I'm going to roll. I'm going to set up this a little bit by telling you about what happened in the 70s, which a lot of you know. Between 73 and 76, the railroads went through a seismic change in the east. And I tried to get out as much as I could, and I was trying to get B&O to Chessie. At the same time, I was trying to get the Erie, Lackawanna, Reading, Jersey Central, Lehigh Valley. It's just so much going on in that period of time. And then they threw, in 75, they threw the Western Maryland out the window. And so I'm concentrating all this in that short period of time, and started out photographing the B&O to Chessie era. And then as 73 came along and it was getting more and more obvious that this Conrail thing was going to go down somewhere in the next couple years, I shifted gears more to those other roads, but stayed with Chessie through Cumberland and all. So what you're going to see is basically I'm going to start with the Baltimore area, work my way west, and then I'm going to throw in two sidebars. And one will be the Western Maryland's involvement in Chessie as it came in through the B&O. And then the last one is going to be Norfolk and Western, which during the later 70s, if anybody was up on Sand Patch at that time, it was a treasure trove. It was the most traffic they ever had up there. There were Norfolk and Western trains every day. The Western Maryland power was prevalent on the trains, and a lot of times on the front. As I found from B&O crews, they love the Western Maryland power, especially the first couple years. A lot of times you'll see F units on the front. They requested them in Cumberland to go west. And I thought that was very interesting. But as the Chessie system maintenance took over from the Hagerstown maintenance, they disappeared, which a lot of power went down the toilet at that point. But what I'm going to do is tell you that the way I'm going to start this, everything is just basically in black and white except a couple shots. People always say, why'd you take black and white? Biggest reasons. One is I processed my own film and printed my own pictures. Second part is that I went on a lot of nasty days in color film and color slide film, but just couldn't cut some of the days I shot in. Miserable. So that was it. And the third at the time was magazines were 95% black and white. And I contributed to a lot of magazines and wrote articles in that 70s period. And because of that, it just was a natural. Main reason was when I got out, if I went out for a long day, bottom line is that it was pouring rain, it was snowing, 100 degrees, 10 degrees. I had to go on the days I had off. So it looks like I had off all the time if you look at all my pictures. But it was a day here and a day there, and I literally drove to Cumberland at 3 o'clock in the morning, would stay up there all day and drive back at night because I had to be at work the next day. So that's what you do when you're 20. I wouldn't do it on a bet now. Picture there is basically me on the Western Maryland in an F unit taken by the engineer who decided he wanted to take a picture of me. And you'll see a lot of the power intermixed. I did that on purpose because this was a transition period. So this is Bayview Yard, Baltimore, eastbound crew change. And then what I'm going to show you, this is Riverside Engine Terminal in Baltimore in the 60s. And as you can see, it started evolving in the 70s where you get all kinds of mixes of stuff on any given day. You could go down there any day of the week and see just a multiple array of power. It was just really a cool time. And Wycomico Street, long gone, but at the time this was the piggyback terminal in Baltimore before Seagirt days. And a lot of the trailer trains would work it just like you're seeing this one here. And awkward moves, very strange place to work. On those curves and all, it was nasty. Now this is down, one of my favorite areas was Patapsco Avenue, the Mount Winans area. This is a westbound. I like the bridge there, but also sitting down in this area in here, nobody ever really bothers you. Even the cops, railroad cops, when they came down, would pretty much leave you alone. As long as they knew you were taking pictures or something, they would just tell you don't step on the main line. This is an eastbound coming in to Mount Winans, westbound waiting to go out. This is down at Lansdowne, another good spot. Anything that came in and out of Baltimore, 95% of it went between Relay and coming up through Mount Winans, and then it's split off in the different directions there. So this was fertile territory to get a lot of trains. And of course, everybody knows what that is. So that is actually the St. Louis trailer train, or trailer jet. I don't know when they changed it from jet to train, but somewhere in that period of time. And of course, the Chessie Steam Special, I always gave Chessie high marks. I was never always a big Chessie fan, but the one thing I can tell you is they were very fan conscious, and I gave them credit for this, and Ross Rowland, when they put all this together. It was a fantastic experience as a rail fan. Now, this was taken in 1970. This is down at Ivy City in Washington, D.C. and eastbound. And the only thing I'm trying to show you here is the transition as it went into the Chessie era. And it was more common, this type of movement. And this right here in Sykesville on the old main line. I always liked this one because it looked like a Chessie promo shot. But at the same time, they just had brought the SD40-2s in, which is why it's relatively clean. And this is a product of the Chessie system washing machines at Cumberland, which broke at the end of the B&O era. Now, interesting thing about this shot here, I had a goal of getting all of the 4 components of the Chessie system. When I say all 4, I'm talking about Chessie itself, B&O, C&O, and Western Maryland. Well, I never set out to take this picture. I was taking a picture actually of this, and I knew this guy was sitting there waiting. And as a helper on the old main line went around the bend, he had the Western Maryland unit, but I didn't have a wide angle lens. So I shot this, and so I used this as a template, and I always wanted to get all 4 of the components together, which you'll see in a while. I only got 1 out of all the times I was up there, but you'll see it. And Brunswick at the time, the Western Maryland was getting the hand-me-downs of hand-me-downs there, and Chessie was working its way in there. And of course, everybody knows this is all gone now, but it was a cool place because you could sit up right by where the YMCA was and all, and just sit there and just take it all in. And everybody knows that this was the equivalent of people chasing heritage units now. Everybody wanted to get the General Motors 50th anniversary unit. I was fortunate enough to get it several times, but this was always my favorite shot because it was taken right at Brunswick. And you can see back in here how active the coal yard was at that point, because Brunswick was an extremely busy place at that point in time. And this is the west side of Brunswick going out, and it wasn't unusual for them to pile a couple things up depending on what was coming east. So this was just a good spot to sit on the west end of the yard. And Miller Tower was another favorite spot because of the line split at the time. And this guy was a bit unusual. He went down the low-grade line, but this was his helper. So I'm not quite sure, and I didn't get a chance to talk to the operator because I was chasing this guy. And I wasn't quite sure why they used the helper on that particular line because it was designed to take coal trains down grade from here. But anyway, it was unique enough that I put it in there, and of course it's in the transition mode there. And this is Hancock westbound. Again, just basically showing the area, showing the transition stuff and as we go through. And the famous concrete wall up on the Magnolia Cutoff westbound. This was also a great spot to sit because both directions, good shots to work the angles throughout the day as the sun changed. And then, let's see. And this coming into Cumberland at North Branch area. And again, I was at this point starting to record if you notice, the 4100s were the first batch of Chessie units. So they were still not common on the front of trains at this point, but they were just as dirty as they've been around for years. So again, just another way of preserving the changeover at that time, which is Cumberland. So when I first went up to Cumberland in the late 60s, that was a sign at the shops. which I always thought was cool. And if you've been up there over the years, they changed it all the way through to the mundane thing it is now. But I always thought they went out of their way for this. And then as it went into the Chessie system, it was still a pretty cool sign. And they did a bicentennial one. They were very conscious of people seeing them. And this is what we were getting early on when the Western Maryland came over. Crazy consists like this, this line was now basically out of service, and they used to do a crazy move out of the Western Maryland area and come over here and back down and do all kinds of strange maneuvers. And that went on for a few months till they got their act together. But you could see neat combinations like this. The RSs didn't last too long in road service, but so this was early on. This is probably fall of '76. But probably fall of '75 at that point. Of course, there's the long gone now West Hump disappeared. I think I missed one. Nope, that's it. So needless to say, everybody knows the story of what CSX has done up there, and it's they say they straightened it out now, but I went up there and it was comical. Their idea of block swapping is to take a cut of double stack cars and keep it there for 2 days. So it's a mess up there, but these were efficient. This is the St. Louis trailer jet train coming by West Hump. Early morning, you generally had St. Louis and Chicago trains come through pretty much back to back. You also had a lot of times 397 would follow, which was empty auto parts from Baltimore and Wilmington. So again, great spots. It's all grown up now, but back in those days, you could go all along the whole industrial boulevard up there and take pictures all day long. This was 1974. B&O started purging its F units out of the fleet, so it was not uncommon to go up to Cumberland on a given day and see a bunch of them just sitting there waiting for their last ride. But these were all out of service at this point. This was a service area back in 1967 when I first went up there. So that was a typical B&O day at that point. And you can see in the Chessie era, as things started changing, this was what the evolvement of things. And I almost got what I wanted there. You see a little bit of C&O, B&O, but not quite where I needed to be yet. This one is when, as the Western Maryland started filtering in, and if you notice, there's even a Southern Pacific unit in there. So that was, a lot of times, that was coming through off the St. Louis line, the West End, Cumberland Division. They would come in from that direction. And what started happening, and I'll get to that in a little bit, when the Norfolk and Western started coming in, you started seeing a lot of UP power. A lot of grain trains back then, a lot of grain. So that was one that just came out of the shop. So I thought if you want to see a good transition, there it is right there, because that kind of shows exactly what was going on as far as the paint scheme. And actually, it looked very nice when it was new. And that was what they used to call a trimmer engine. He'd pull cars back and shift them from one yard to the other. And let me see where we are here. Okay. Just to make sure I don't miss anybody. Oh, next one is the one I was telling you about earlier. This is the All in the Family shot. And this is the only one I ever got. So you'll appreciate this. If you notice, every component, C&O, Western Maryland, I got the Chessie, the B&O. This was a home run that never recurred again in all the shooting I did. So I just thought that was very interesting because it was the only time I ever got all four components. And what made that one even sweeter was I got them all on that train coming in. Unfortunately, that train was coming in, never got another shot of them because I was on the west side of the yard. And the problem was he cut the power off and went back to the shop, and I never could get a clean shot of it. So that was it, but it was a victory. So from that point of view, okay. It's just another westbound of that era. You can see how the power started mixing in on there. And I'm doing a program in December for the Western Maryland group. And you'll see a lot of different same spots, but Western Maryland power on the front of everything, because that's how prevalent it was at that point in time. But we're B&O people today. So this is the Ready tracks back in 1967. Just using the car lights and whatever was moving around. Now the evolution here is when the Western Maryland came over. Look at the difference in the power. And look at the F units set first out for some of the eastbounds and all. So this shows you that these crews preferred the Western Maryland power when it was there in abundance. And what had happened eventually is it worked its way in through the fleet. They started going all over the system. And then they started wearing the F units out, to be frank. I mean, at that point, they weren't getting the maintenance, loving care that they got at Hagerstown. Now, what you're seeing here is Virginia Lane. It looks like nothing, but it was really the nerve center of the West End. So you go up to Virginia Lane now, and if you sit on the west side there, you know, all the automatic signals or the remote control units moving stuff around. Well, this was all manual back then, and that little shack there controlled all the movements in and out of the yard. And it wasn't much to look at, but that was it. And the thing that always made it interesting, it was always busy, always busy. So what you have there is they use a flag system. When an eastbound was coming into the yard, every eastbound got instructions how to yard. And the other thing was that they used a green flag east. He had a yellow flag for west. And when he gave him the high sign, you know, they weren't all using radios back then. So that was one of those pieces. I'm glad I took it because obviously you never see that again. Now, this was a switch tender. If anybody's familiar with West End and Cumberland Yard, you know where the safety stop is. Used to be the switch tender shanty. And he used to sit there and work in concert with the operator. So he would handle movements like you're seeing here, and then he would coordinate with the switches to get the trains on the proper tracks once the operator had gotten the orders to him as to where to put everything. West end of the yard, typical what would pile up on the west end at any given time. As you can see, again, the Western Maryland influence coming through there in the old C&O units. And I like the GP30s, always liked them. So they were still using them pretty frequently through the 70s, all the way up until the end of the 70s. Another day, another setup. And again, what I'm trying to capture at that point is the mix that was going through at Cumberland at that time. And again, from the other side of Virginia Lane, you can see at times how busy it got. It was not uncommon to have somebody out on the main line moving, one or two, one guy coming in, this guy probably was a priority, and this guy waiting to follow him in. It was the train movements on that side during the mid to late 70s, you could see the train sheets and count counting movements, yard movements, and through freights and all. You could see upwards of 70 plus movements during a 24-hour period. A lot of light engine movements and all, but there were about 30 to 40 road freights that came through or originated or were terminating or bypassing. And that is the other side of Chessie in 1973. That beautiful station was being reduced to what you see there. It was very sad, but it was one of those things I figured needed documentation at the time. But when I first went up there, it was in pretty bad shape, but they were still using it because they were still. Matter of fact, I used to go to Cumberland on B&O passenger trains sometimes. I get a Bud car out of Baltimore, go down to DC and take the Metropolitan West, and then take the Metropolitan East in the evening coming back. So it let me have a full day. And I'd just walk around the yard and up through there. So that was kind of a sad sight to see. And again, the Western Maryland, you can see at this point they're building the what would be the post office and Amtrak coming through there. And again, the Western Maryland power in the consist. Viaduct Junction, pretty much what it looked like all the way through to the end. It was re-sided from the original B&O woodwork, but it was still very viable, obviously, at this point in time. Probably the most unique feature, obviously, was the telegraph that was still being used between Connellsville and Cumberland, which would have continued because a lot of the operators had seniority, so they were old heads. They all had to learn Morse. So what was interesting was to watch these guys actually be able to do this stuff. And what happened there, I don't know if you guys remember, in about early mid-80s, I forget the exact year, they had a bad flood that came down through Wills Creek and wiped out all the code lines, everything. So when was it?
84.
84, thank you. I knew, I was going to say 83 or 84, but I knew somebody would know.
The other thing one of the tower operators told me was that they continued
tended to use Morse because the guys in the office didn't know how to hear and read.
That's true. That's true. And if you want to add another story on to that, these guys had radios, but B&O, for some reason, in the mid-'70s, was really radio averse. They still use hand signals all the time and all. So they'd have the radio set sitting there, and the operators would tell me, I don't use it because these guys never answer me. So the crews didn't care. But everybody, like anything else, it evolved. Now this is the west end of the Narrows back in about 72. And back then, the Western Maryland still ran jobs down here at Eckhart Junction. They had a couple of businesses down along there, so you could actually see that. And I believe that the Western Maryland still kind of owned this stretch at the time. And they kind of leased it to the B&O. This is all before everything merged together. But anyway, for a short period of time through the Narrows, this was technically not a B&O line. And then later on, later 70s, this is one of the stranger leads that I saw coming out of Cumberland. But at the same time, what they did was they eventually took it out of service up here, this old Western Maryland track, and put in a crossover. But by about 77, 78, this track went out of service whenever the business closed down there, and they pulled the crossover out. So the one place I cut a little bit short was the west end of the Cumberland Division. I went on that a lot when I was in the B&O days, but as they transitioned into Chessie, anybody's been over that whole line. It was not always straight shots as far as getting to different spots. It would eat your day up just traveling around up there. So I kind of used Cumberland and the Sand Patch and easy places to drive up and down. But I left part of it in because I thought it was important. This shot was at M&K just as things were starting to transition. This snuck into the middle of, as you can see, these were the standard power. That is a Chessie there. And they had 3 sets of SD-35s that would go up and down the mountains, Cranberry Grade that way, Cheat River that way, Newburgh past that, and then 17-mile grade east of Cranberry. So rare moment that you get even a couple sets in there because they were always going back and forth. Always. Sometimes they'd leave them attached to a westbound and he would just ride all the way to a place called Hardman, and then he'd hook on an eastbound and come back, and they did that all day long. It was actually a pretty cool operation. This is a coal train coming by M&K. The thing I always liked is just to stand there, and only a 20-year-old would stand there and try to inhale brake shoe smoke. But I used to love this because they were coming off Cheat River, and just as he would get halfway through, he'd accelerate, and he'd have the helpers on the back. Sometimes, if they needed a helper back for another eastbound, they would stop at M&K and take a helper out of the pocket there and put him on, depending on traffic levels at any given time. But I used to love this because by the time he was going by the end of that train, it was just looked like fog. They had so much brake shoe smoke. And this gives you an idea. This is an eastbound coming up at Amblersburg on Cranberry Grade. And I think you can see the battle they're starting up this grade. And it's 12 miles of hell. And I mean, these trains would be down on their knees a lot of times by they hit the summit. But it was a great chase, and it was not always accessible in between, but you could actually get some good shots of the eastbounds because they were so slow. You could get up there and drive up a service road and all back then. And that's a typical 4-unit helper going into the Chessie era, safety caboose on the back, the repainted unit. And they hung on to the B&O ones as long as they could, but as they went into shop and all, they started all coming back Chessie. Now, my favorite part of the whole west end was cutting off on the fly at Terra Alta at the top of Cranberry. So this was in the B&O era, and you can see they would cut off on the fly, and it was just a cool operation. So what I did was I took that to the Chessie era, doing the same thing, just a different side, and you can see the steepness of that grade as it comes to the top. And when a train would come up through there, you could hear him for about half an hour. And then when you get there, all you see is the top, and then see him slowly coming up. And that's how severe that grade is until it levels off there at Terra Alta. But he cut off. Now the next shot I'm going to show you This is, now we're going into the 80s, and you notice I am shooting some color at that point. And the reason I brought this one, because this was really the last time I ever went there as a rail fan. So what had happened was they traded in the SD35s, and now they were using 3 SD50s. And not that this was bad, I mean, it was cool, but it was definitely fully Chessie involved at that point. But the other thing too is, if you remember during the 80s, they took off the St. Louis line. So a lot of traffic disappeared off of that line, and coal was actually declining too. So for me to go up there and spend a couple days, I wouldn't say it was a waste of time, but I didn't have the time. It would be a fairer assessment. So that's all I put in for the West End, because quite honestly, I could have filled a whole program with that, but it gives you the idea, because Cranberry was my favorite part because of the severeness of the grade and just the action at the top and the action at the bottom as well. And the tower operators were super cool back then. The guy at M&K and the guy at CA Tower, which is up at Terra Alta, fantastic to talk to. They let you stay there all day, answer all your questions, let you throw the switches, they let you hand up orders. I mean, anything you wanted to do as a railroader, you could do as a rail fan with these guys. Half the time, I think they're just too damn lazy, and they say, go down and hand that up to this guy going by. I said, okay, and it was never anybody going fast, because I'd stand there and I'd say, now I know why these people get nervous. But they were going slow, usually coming out of the shop area. So we're going on to my favorite, because this is where I spent a lot of the later part of the 70s, and that's Sandpatch. This was a typical helper set back in the early 70s, late 60s. Generally, they had 2 GP38s, GP38, GP9. So that was standard helper fare back then, and it evolved through the 70s. This was an interim period. That is an N&W train, which shows you this is after Western Maryland went out. And they would actually use fairly new power, but I don't think the Power Bureau was appreciating using their newer power just for helpers out of Hyndman, Pennsylvania. So this lasted just a little while and evolved into what you'll see. This is the helper station at Hyndman for Sandpatch. And you see what they actually put in here in the later 70s were the SD40-2s, which even the crews were surprised that they got power this good to do the climb up the hill. But this was, this is when I did most of my rides, because I had so many pictures on Sandpatch, and I got to know the engineers so well. I could ride when I want, and I'm not bragging. Anybody could have done it. All you had to do was go ask them, but they got to know me. So, and I give them pictures. So nothing warms a railroader's heart more than a picture of themselves at work. Trust me. Now, in here, this is a Hyndman helper in action. You'll notice the Western Maryland unit in there. What I did notice in 77, 78, big influx of Western Maryland power into the Hyndman helpers too. So this was a very, very common setup with the SD40-2 and one of the Western Maryland units. They ran the hell out of the Western Maryland units. I mean, it's amazing they lasted as long as they did. But they loved them. Again, this is at Manila, near the top is the Sandpatch grade. And again, you'll see the Western Maryland unit in there. And this is just another day, another dollar. And I'm on a light helper that's going back down to Hyndman. But this pocket here, sometimes they use it. I think I only remember seeing it used one time, but it was obviously used because the rails were shiny. But they did most of their stuff on the other side of the Sandpatch tunnel up at the summit itself. This was I like this one because this was pretty close to what I wanted. There was a C&O, B&O in Chessie, and the Western Maryland, quote unquote, was on the cab there. So I said this was my second closest shot to an all-in-the-family one. So I left it in there. He's just above Hyndman at this point, which is just one angle after another. It's just a beautiful, beautiful place to photograph, and I just worked it to death. I always like this one because I love the signal at Mance. It's the tallest one I ever saw, a single post. So I just put that in there because I like it. But at the same time, it's showing, again, you'll notice that on this particular train, this is a Hyndman helper on the front, which was not overly common going west. It was common going east because of the heavy grain trains that came east at that point. So sometimes they put the Hyndman helper on the front and they'd have a Connellsville helper on the back. it depended on the tonnage, but quite honestly, the best show in town was the eastbound grain trains coming up the other side, because you had a lot of sweeping views, and you'll see a couple of them. This is a manse, obviously. Now, at this point, this is later on, you'll notice that the helpers went down to single unit. And again, they started Chessie in its austerity moves here tried to cut back on the use of power just to tie up for helpers. So they started going down to one unit this way, and they found that after a while it didn't work, because some of these trains were 7,000 to 8,000 tons at the time, and just 2 units on the front, maybe 3 at best. And the horsepower back then, obviously the power then was not the equivalent of the power now. So they found that they were stalling these things and all. This was more typical of an eastbound that did not have a helper coming up the other side, because then they'd overpower them like this. And this was never a good thing either, because they pulled a lot of drawbars on the west slope. So there's all kinds of craziness going on. Of course, that's the summit itself, which was always just a good place to sit. And the tower was really a nice place to sit on a really cold day. So the operator would say, we got something on. As soon as it would hit, anybody's been in the tower, as soon as it would hit the bell, I'd go position wherever I wanted, and then I knew he was going to be there in the next few minutes. And this is a shot at the summit. Now this has all been reworked in the Chessie era, a much simplified plant. That's one of the reasons the tower disappeared. You didn't have the pockets are all gone and all this kind of stuff. You still have obviously the 2 mainline tracks and all. But this was pretty typical of what you get at the summit at the time, because things tended to bunch up at the top. So this is a Hyman helper who is just cut off from his westbound, and then this eastbound, and he'll have, no doubt he'll have helpers behind him. And B&O is not shy about putting 3 cabooses on there and putting the helpers on back like that. But I can tell you that there was never a rear end crew that rode in it when you had 2 or 3 cabooses on the rear. That was not a safety first thing. So again, we were waiting to go back down, so we went into the pocket here. There was another westbound coming, and this was a Connellsville helper pushing east at this point. The Connellsville helper, whatever they could throw together in the yard, and as you'll see, they used to steal the Western, not the Western Maryland, they used to steal the Norfolk and Western power all the time. And what they would do is, with the Western Maryland, they would use their power on the front, and then they'd take the N&W power off of their trains. They had 2 solid ones, a WJ1, DJ12, and they would take their power off of Connellsville, and they'd let their eastbound sit there, and they use the N&W road power for the Connellsville helper. So needless to say, N&W eventually got the notice that they weren't welcome on the Chessie system. And this is taken from the Salisbury Viaduct, Western Maryland, but you can see there's an N&W unit in the Connellsville helper. This is an eastbound. Anybody familiar, that's all 219 now. You can't get a shot like that anymore. But the Western Maryland was shut down at this point. And so this was a typical, they'd throw anything together, and just, if it needed a push, whatever they had available. And that's why I say, if an N&W unit happened to be sitting there and needed service, they'd gas it and go. And that's what it looked like coming into the east portal of Sand Patch on the westbound helper. And like I was telling you before about the black and white, now this is a good reason why I would use black. I could have never done this with Kodachrome. That's how bad it got up there sometimes. And sometimes that snow squalls would come up so fast. Then you get to the top and there'd be nothing, or vice versa. It'd be clear down the bottom. You get up to the top and it was a blizzard. Now this shot, we were actually on the front. This is a grain train. What we did was we went on the front of the grain train, and I'll tell you a little story about this. That engineer there became one of my better friends in the railroading career, and I'll tell you in a minute. But what we did was they had an option at Garrett to put the helper on the front or the helper on the back. And my buddy's comment always was, we'll see who the real men are. The real men would say, put it on the back. The guys that wanted the free ride would say, put the helper on the front. So Yeah, so we were on the front on this guy, and it's a younger guy, so he probably said, you know, I'll let this old head take me down. And that's what we're doing now. We're going back to the helper station. He's now on his way east at that point. So that's what's going on there. But that was a story. The old guys always got a kick out of that because these young guys don't like to come down that hill with a grain train. He said, we'll go on the front. Sure as hell, Garrett, the guy standing at the switch, because there was a hand-thrown switch, and he said, I told you. This is my buddy. I got to know a lot of engineers and a lot of railroads, but Homer Friend was the nicest man that I ever met on the railroads, and that's bar none. He was a super guy, not an over-talker, old B&O guy. He started on EM1, so he had a lot of experience at this point in time. And he was a regular. There was a guy named Carl Kemp and a guy named Jim Pick. And they were the three regulars on the Heinemann helpers. So any of those guys, if they were working, I could get a ride. But Homer had a place in Heinemann that he'd stay if he was working and turning right around and going back out. So when I'd go up there, he would let me use his apartment. So that's how nice a guy he was. And then he'd go by at 3 o'clock in the morning, make sure he blew the horn enough to let me know that I was awake. And he did that intentionally. Super guy. Lost track of him in the 80s. Work got in my way. He took a buyout along with a lot of other people that were up there. Old heads took a $50,000 buyout at that point and retired. So I lost track of him for years because I went on to other things. My business just was eating my time up at that point in time. So fast forward, 1994, my wife and myself were in Friendsville, Maryland, named after his family. And I'm in the store just getting a soda or something, and I heard him talking, and I heard his voice 1,000 times. I said, that's gotta be Homer. So needless to say, it was Homer Friend, who I hadn't seen for about 9 years. And there's a picture of us in front of the store at that point. And then we went back to his house, spent the whole day with him, and he was showing us, he said, you made me famous. And I said, I did? And he said, yeah, that article in that magazine. He said, I have people come from all over the world. He said, looking for a ride. I said, you give him one? He goes, hell yeah. And what he showed us was they came, he got so famous that a Philadelphia television station came and filmed a day on the mountain with him. And he showed us the documentary they did. He said, you made me famous. I said, well, I'm glad I could help. I'm watching my time, folks, but I'm doing good. Getting through this. Now we're going to take our sidebars. I did this one because this was, these are the kind of shots I used to like to get. This is actually out in Ohio, but at the same time, it kind of served to show you that the Western Maryland power was going everywhere. And at the time, and it was a good transition shot. The Western Maryland guys will like this one in a few months. Now, interesting story here. You notice the BL2. I happened to be down at Mount Winans one day, had no clue, just sitting there doing this thing. I used to sometimes cheat. I didn't have a radio, so I used to listen in on the phone. And I listened to him talking, and you'd hear HX Tower at Halethorpe, the dispatcher and all. Great way, he said, I got an eastbound coming in for A Yard. And so I said, all right. So I set up and I did a double take, and I said, that's a BL2. So what happened was, this is when it was originally coming to the B&O Museum. Just pure dumb luck that was in the consist. So that was cool, and I saw some recent pictures of it, and it's pathetic. It's all rusted out. No, what a shame, because they had it so much painted into this thing. It was beautiful. Now I'm digressing a little bit, because this was pretty much Hagerstown back in 70, 71. That's a pretty normal ready track setup. Now I want to show you how it evolved. Okay, you're getting into the 73, 74 period. And just the mix was interesting because the BL2 had worked its way into the ready track at that point. And then, dig this. This is June of 1976 at Hagerstown. Notice, Conrail has definitely shown up. You got B&O, Chessie, Erie, Lackawanna, Chessie, Erie, Lackawanna, and a Penn Central unit coming in. No Western Maryland. The Western Maryland power is all dispersed west of there because the B&O crews out of Cumberland were using it all, and a lot of the crews were not intermingled yet. So you had Western Maryland men still operating separately from the B&O guys, which caused some friction. There was a lot of seniority problems at that time and all. They got it all straightened out, but back in late 75, 76, even in the early 77, some of these B&O guys didn't like to work with the Western Maryland guys. The Western Maryland guys wanted to stay with their own. They wanted their own power on the front. And you can see why, because that was Hagerstown in 1976. No Western Maryland power to be found. And then Western Maryland, as part of the Chessie realignment, while they were stealing all the power and taking it west, they were getting the hand-me-downs that the B&O got from the C&O, now were being handed down to the Western Maryland. So that was the Chessie paint scheme du jour for Western Maryland power at the time. And now, one of the important things was that Big Pool came into play from a whole different perspective. The line west was shut down at this point. So the stuff would come out of Hagerstown. This guy's going into Hagerstown, coming off of Cherry Run across the Potomac. And what would happen here is that generally at Big Pool, there were meets were very common at this point in time. They were still trying to iron out the operational stuff. So it was a cool place to sit, actually, because it was the last hurrah where you'd actually get some pretty good action there. And this was typical of what was happening at that point. Again, Western Maryland power on the front, going under what was now the out-of-service Western Maryland main line east of Cumberland. And that track there is the one they used to make the crazy moves down. They backed the whole train down and then go forward. It was a time-consuming thing. It tied up the east end of the yard, and in their infinite wisdom, Chessie was so hell-bent on keeping N&W out of Baltimore that they would rather do stuff like that than use the Western Maryland, which was much better setup as far as goes, except for Williamsport. But they could go all the way down as far as Hancock and all. Is what they did a lot of times, and switch over. It was a lot of, and this is before I had a scanner, so everything was done either by tower operator, or if you could talk to a crew, or just instinct, just from being out there. Sometimes you said, oh, he's going to do this or he's going to do that. And sometimes you're right, sometimes you're wrong. I call this suicide by Western Maryland unit. This was not uncommon at Cumberland. Hostler once in a while would forget to set the brakes, and it would drift down in. This happened to be a Western Maryland unit, and I always said this one was waiting to kill itself after this one was done. Because I had to laugh at the Western Maryland units, because I said, I know they didn't want to be there. And this was an N&W train. This was typical. This is grain empties going west, but it was not uncommon in the wintertime in probably 75 to 80. You could see as many in prime time when the St. Lawrence Seaway was closed down. You could see 5 or 6 grain trains a day, and that's no exaggeration. 3 was very common. Sometimes it would get up to 6, and I knew that just from the Hyman helpers, and I could also look at the sheets and see, and they'd say grain, 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 grain. So it was very, very busy, and you still had ore trains back then going west, which was a very cool move because you used to cut the helpers in mid-train on the westbound ore trains. All that stuff's gone. And that's just another one. Again, Western Maryland, whenever they could, they put the Western Marylands in the lead. He's coming into the west side, and of course the whole shop complex in the background. You can see Western Maryland power even in back there. And there you go with an F unit leading westbound out of town, out of Cumberland. And again, like I said, not as uncommon as you would think through the late 70s. I would say 77, 78, when they had an F unit on the front, even if I was getting ready to ride a Hyman helper, I wouldn't go. Because I said, you know, I can ride with you guys anytime, but I can't get an F unit on the front of a train anymore. So they said, okay. They didn't get it. It was just another engine to them. And there, in the end, was 1980, and that's what eventually the Western Maryland F units wound up the same way as the B&O ones 6 years earlier. And the power that was piling up there on any given basis, they were really starting to purge the older Western Maryland power out. Sometimes you see a whole line of RS units. Every time up there was a surprise because it was something different. Okay, well, I'm doing good. I'm going to actually finish on time. Okay, we're going into one last phase, and that's the N&W phase up there. And the reason I put that in is it'll be obvious. This again is Hancock. You'll notice here, he is crossing over. What he's lining up for is to go through Cherry Run, cross the Potomac in the Big Pool. This was DJ 12. So he was a through Norfolk and Western train. I keep wanting to say Norfolk Southern because it's so easy now. But that's why he ran opposite all the way down the Cherry Run and then crossed the Potomac. So that's what he's doing at Hancock there. Again, this is a westbound coming into from Mexico Farms Road, which everybody that's ever been to Cumberland has stood on, I'm sure. Again, the west end of the yard, the mix of stuff was always incredible. Again, you got all the mixture of stuff, and Norfolk and Western SD unit was just about unheard of. I don't know how in the hell that got loose from wherever it got loose from, but needless to say, I chased that one all the way at Connellsville. Because I said, I'll never see that again, and I didn't. Typical mix, how they use the N&W power. Now, this is an N&W grain train that came through Connellsville and all. So again, I'm not quite sure. It was unusual that they put a B&O unit on the front at this point. I know he had to have helpers. There's no way he would have gotten up the West Slope without them. But it's interesting that they put a B&O unit on there. They must have just not had they must have stolen enough of the Norfolk and Western units for helper power that they didn't bother to keep one around for their own stuff. So anyway, that's unusual. And this was not unusual. Again, an eastbound grain train, interesting mix of power, but it was not uncommon to see UP power up there at this later 70s. That was very, very normal.
Are they Fairbanks Morse units in the back there?
Pardon me?
Are they Fairbanks Morse units?
No, they're actually General Electric. They're the ones you're looking at in the back there. These?
Can't tell.
Yeah. No such luck. I left the Fairbanks Morse power with the 60s in Baltimore. But Baltimore was full of them back then. And this is at Baltimore Street. They still had an operator there at the time. And the Norfolk and Western trains going east would bypass the yard. And so he's just getting orders on what he's supposed to do. But again, that of course, Baltimore Street is not, remember that back then they still had the crossing people, the gates weren't there, and they still had an operator that worked out of there. And then they had the locals that used to come and watch all the time. And so that was a pretty cool thing to get, because that only lasted a short period of time, and then they closed Baltimore Street. This is a coal train coming in, again, UP unit in there, N&W on the front. This is a Chessie coal train, so this is a classic example of stolen power. And this is Q Tower at the bottom of Sandpatch, again, eastbound N&W train. So he had his real power on there that went all the way through to Hagerstown. Q Tower was a great spot. It's in its original B&O form, which I always liked, with the shingles and all, which I thought was pretty cool. Again, here's another stolen moment. Again, N&W power mixed in with a C&O unit they grabbed somewhere. This is at Keystone, West Slope, right below the summit. But that was, again, you never knew what was going to be on a Connellsville helper. And this is at the top. So bottom line is, this guy had assisted in eastbound. Here, he's waiting to let this guy cross over and start back to Connellsville. But this one was 3 N&W units. And again, they probably wanted to get him back to Connellsville before N&W Power Bureau was wondering why their train was sitting in Connellsville for 2 days. And then he would follow down, cross back over, and then go back down to Hyman. I did want to mention, folks, is on YouTube. If you go to my channel, I have a lot of videos up. Matter of fact, I just put a Chessie one up, so it's all Chessie. But Norfolk and Western, Delaware and Hudson, Erie, Lackawanna, Lehigh Valley, the Western roads, and they're all just 5-6 minute videos. But if you want some, just look through it. And if you go in there, I'm trying to get subscribers up. So if you go on, just subscribe to me. It's not going to cost you anything, but it may make me some money someday. And being a mercenary at heart, I'll take anything I can get. So thank you very much. I enjoyed it. It's the first time in 3 years I've been here, and I want to tell you that I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed when I did the thing at Cumberland too back then. So from that point of view, call me back, see what else I can drum up. I've got pictures aplenty.